Whatever had happened in Norpos, it would take at least 9 or 10 days to reach Black Bridge in weather like this. If fortune was merciful, perhaps even 2 weeks. I have to think clearly. If I find the source of that voice, I will find a way to stop the fury that killed my master. Gods! Why Uhtred? By all 7 gods and every forgotten local spirit, why him? I do not know what it was, but if something managed to kill Uhtred, then it is worse than anything we have ever faced. And I do not even have time to mourn him. I left my family behind. My master is dead, and I am riding into snowstorm, chasing the source of a voice that may be nothing more than my own madness. I could lose everything because of my own foolishness, but it is already too late. Black Bridge is disappearing behind me. Now there is only thing that matters. Forward. Northeast. Only northeast. So he rode. Along the road he passed refugees, abandoned homes, and roads growing emptier with every mile, until at last he left the path to Norpos and turned east. He had expected far more people fleeing south. Instead, he found only a few, and every one of them looked as though they had already walked through hell, as though only their bodies remained while their souls had left much earlier. All of them in shock, all of them exhausted. But the worst sight came at dusk. A child, alone, roughly the age of his eldest son. Torn shoes, rags for clothing, a ruined, blood-stained blanket clutched tightly around a body too small for that much cold. The emptiness in the child's eyes looked like a fragment of a nightmare you would do anything to wake from. It moved along the beaten path like a shadow walking ahead of nightfall. And in that moment, Vaelric understood. Whatever was coming was something the world had never seen before, or something it had seen long ago, and no one had survived long enough to describe it. The road to the mountain range was the easier part of the journey. Inside his mind, only one thought kept returning. What if I am too late? What if that thing is faster than I am? What if the answer I am chasing is not enough? I will lose my mind. At last, he stood before the beginning of the mountain path. The first day of the journey was spent watching what remained of the people, men and women who looked more like ghosts than survivors. The second day was unnaturally quiet, and that silence proved worse. He saw no one, not a single living soul. The road to the eastern edge of the mountain range had never been crowded, but there was always someone, a hunter, a merchant, a lone pilgrim, even some drunk fool who had taken the wrong road. This time, nothing. Worse still, he saw none of the local creatures. No wolves, no mountain beasts, no trolls, the same one that had plagued travels for years. Nothing. A complete unnatural emptiness. The only thing he was certain of was the direction. He did not know how, but he could feel it clearly. Something, or someone, was leading him forward. He made a camp near beginning of the mountain trail. He lit a fire, fed the horses, gave them water. Then he cast a protective spell around the camp, just to grant himself one brief moment of rest without the knife of his own thoughts pressed against his throat. He pulled out dried beef and a piece of dark bread. After supper, he tried to sleep, but the lonely road, the vision of a ruined home, a lost family, and the death of his master would not let him close his eyes. I do not believe that someone as powerful as Uhtred could fail. I truly do not. What in the God's name was it? If Uhtred died, perhaps I will find out soon enough. He lay down and tried to surrender to sleep. But every time he drifted close, nightmares dragged him back awake. That night became the worst night of his life. Snow fell without pause. Somewhere in the distance a wild animal screamed in agony, as if something had cornered it, trapped it, and left it there to die slowly. Then suddenly, silence. It was a heavy night. The moment sun began cutting the horizon with pale light, he rose and continued. Now the hardest part of the journey began, not because the trail itself was especially difficult, quite the opposite. The beginning was gentle. The road from the plains flowed naturally into the mountain terrain, narrowing slightly, climbing higher, but still passable on horseback. The problem was not the road. That problem was not the place. He felt strangeness in a land he knew well, as if the cold pierced deeper than winter itself, as if the air had become heavier, denser, as though it no longer belonged to this world. The place felt wrong, twisted. He rode onto the path. Suddenly, the white horse stopped dead and violently tried to turn back. It was terrified of something. Vaelric dismounted immediately. He tried to calm the animal, but without success. The horse was tense to the edge of madness. Eyes wide, nostrils trembling, every muscle locked in fear. It sensed something a man could not yet name. Only after a long while, steady hands against its back and a quiet voice whispered into the cold, did the animal begin to calm. And in that moment, Vaelric understood. There truly was no turning back now. Snow groaned heavily beneath every hoofstep. Each sound felt too loud, as if the mountain itself could hear him. It only fed the spiral of fear. Even the animals were beginning to feel it, especially the white horse, which needed calming again and again. The black one endured it far better, bred and trained for war. Then suddenly, he stopped at a crossroads. A place he had never seen before, despite crossing these mountains many times. A new path, narrow enough that continuing on horseback made no sense. So he dismounted, gathered part of his supplies, and let the animals go free. He knew that if he truly needed them, they would return. Horses often understood more than men. Now he was alone. Alone with his fear, and that fear was slowly becoming something far worse. What am I doing? Gods, what in all creation am I doing? I only pray they are safe. The cold grew unbearable. His hands were beginning to freeze. Each breath sat in his lungs like ice. And just as he began cursing himself, just as the last fragments of hope were starting to rot inside him, he stopped. As if lightning had struck the earth directly before his feet. Before him, carved into the mountain itself, stood a gate. Monumental, impossible. Ancient runes covered its surface. Old, older than memory. He moved forward slowly, unable to believe what he was seeing, uncertain whether this was still reality or whether fear had finally stolen his mind. This should not be here. He placed his hands against the stone doors. They began to open. From the widening crack came the scent of poisonous herbs and burnt ash. Thick, suffocating, ancient. And then the voice came again. Enter. So he did, full of doubt. But now it was not only fate pushing him forward. Ordinary human curiosity has led men into the jaws of the abyss just as often as destiny. The corridor widened with every step, until at last it opened into a true hall. At the far end stood the entrance to an enormous chamber, and within it a black throne. Before the throne rested 4 sarcophagi. One of them stood open. Along the walls were altars lined with incense, candles, and offerings long turned to dust. The air was heavy with smoke, and something older than smoke. Ancient magic. The chamber was covered in runes and inscriptions carved into stone, but this language was different from the one on the gate. This one he could no longer read. And then he saw her, a figure in robes, the hood pulled so low it devoured the face beneath it. She stood at the far end of the hall, perfectly still. Then suddenly she turned toward him. The movement was wrong, too smooth, too fast, as though the body no longer obeyed human limits. And then she vanished. Vaelric did not know what he had just seen. His heart pounced like a war drum. His skin turned cold beneath the cold. The deeper he walked in search of answers, the more he felt his own mind beginning to fracture. "You are here." A thin voice, almost childlike, whispered from directly behind him. A shiver tore through his entire body. He did not know whether he should turn around. "You are the one called by the voice." A pale hand rested gently on his shoulder. Vaelric was trembling, but he forced himself to answer. "Yes, I am." He gathered what little courage he had left. "I came here to..." The figure suddenly stood face to face with him. Beneath the hood only the outline of a face could be seen. And the eyes filled with a pale celadon glow, staring directly into him with an intensity that bordered on pain. They paralyzed. She interrupted him. "Yes, I know. For when fury rises from beneath the earth, the one will come, the one history shall remember as one of the first." Her voice was calm, far too calm. Come. Soon everything will become clear to you. But first, there is something you must do if you wish to receive answers to all questions that torment you. The hooded figure took his hand and led him through the chamber. Then, with a slight bow, she gestured toward the throne, inviting him to sit. Wait. She began whispering an incantation beneath her breath, something suspended somewhere between prayer and spell. Something that sounded as though it had been torn alive from the stories northern mothers used to frighten their children. And then, whatever she was, disappeared. Vaelric understood nothing anymore. His entire body trembled. Cold sweat ran down his back. He sat upon the throne as if someone had nailed him to it with iron spikes, rigid, paralyzed, unable to think. He still tried to force reason into what was happening, but it had gone too far. He had passed the edge. I sentenced myself to this. I have gone mad. After a moment, the figure returned. In her hands, she carried a silver tankard and placed it before him. Vaelric took it uncertainly. The gesture made one thing clear: drink. He raised it to his lips, and suddenly he remembered the scent from the entrance. Poisonous herbs. Drink. The figure hissed the word. So he drank. It was hot ale mixed with herbs, not poisonous. At least he hoped not. But strange, bitter, foreign on the tongue. He felt better, physically. Mentally, it was worse. What now? His voice finally broke. What must I do to save them? Who was calling me? What am I supposed to do now? Where is the answer to what is coming? What is all of this? Speak! I will not tell you. The figure slowly raised a hand. I exist only for her. And for you. She pointed upward. On the ceiling was a painting. A woman in a black gown, her hood drawn low over her face. She held people in her arms. They looked as though they were sleeping or dead. To her womb we all return, and only in her womb will you understand. You must make an offering and ask her what comes next. The figure pointed toward the open sarcophagus. You want me to climb into a coffin and perhaps let you seal it shut as well? Have you lost your mind? Never. Go, and you will understand. Without your sacrifice, you will save nothing. You will understand nothing, and your journey will end here regardless. And in that moment, Vaelric understood. He was not speaking to a person, but to something like a guardian, an intermediary, something that did not persuade, only guided. He stepped closer to the sarcophagus. Inside was a liquid that smelled like poppy milk, but its color was entirely wrong. Celadon. almost the exact same shade as the Guardian's eyes. He stepped inside, feeling warmth slowly wrapping itself around his body. He thought of his children. Were they playing now? Were they once again sitting beside the old aunt, listening to stories of knights and mages who fought to protect the weak? He thought of his wife, of the way she cooked supper, of the way she argued in the market over the price of bread, the way she fixed her hair whenever she was nervous. And in that moment, he understood. He might never return to any of it. When he lifted his eyes, the figure was still watching him, waiting. "Am I supposed to lie down?" he asked with the voice of a man who already knows the answer. Vaelric stood there for a moment longer. His mind was tearing itself apart with thoughts of home, of what was happening now in Blackbridge. Were the children still laughing? Had his wife already begun to fear the silence? Had the nightmare from Norpos already moved closer? He stood inside a sarcophagus, filled with strange liquid, while the figure beside him remained silent. He knelt. He lay down. He crossed his hands over his chest. The liquid covered almost all of him. The figure slowly began to move the lid, sealing the mage inside. And only then he truly understood there was no turning back. He tried to remain calm, sealed, isolated, alone. Then suddenly, the level of the liquid began to rise until it covered him completely. He tried to keep his face above the surface, but the fluid filled the entire chamber. "I let myself be killed. What have I done?" He struggled. Once, twice. Instinct fought for every breath. Then, after a moment, he stopped. "I hope you have enough time to run." And then he remembered the Guardian's words. "Let it carry you." Not knowing whether it was courage or complete surrender, he stopped resisting. He opened his mouth. The liquid rushed inside. It burned. It suffocated. It took everything. Yes, this is the end. I'm sorry, my love. A few final moments of agony. His heart stopped. Not slowed, not weakened. Stopped. And in that moment, Vaelric of Blackbridge, husband, father, merchant, mage, died. Not on a battlefield, not defending his home, but alone, buried alive, inside the coffin of a forgotten god. And if you believe this is where the story of the first necromancer begins, then you are still reading the wrong page. Because necromancy does not begin with raising the dead. It begins with deciding what must be buried first. I am the last archivist of the Second Age, and these chronicles are never kind to those who ask for power. Tonight we close the second chapter of Vaelric, but the next belongs to Olma herself, to death, to the price, and to the moment a man chooses whether his soul is worth saving. If you wish to stand beside me when we open that page, remain. A subscription, a like, a comment, a coffee. Your name written into the records of House Genioslav. Because in the next chapter, Vaelric will wake, where no living man should ever stand.